is a matter of concern. And of course, it being a very marginal seat, it's one that's likely to fall if Labor's vote is slipped in Victoria.
Well, I can just get you off the phone there for a moment, Senator. Dunkley, we were just talking about Dunkley. It appears on our computer that your man is behind the 8 ball, but you were suggesting to me you were going to hold it.
Well, we've got 5 birds in from Dunkley so far. One shows a 1% swing against us, the other 4 trending up to 1% to us. And seeing you need a 2% swing or
1.2% swing.
1.2. We will hold Dunkley, I'm pretty confident.
Well, it's a bit hairy there, but
well, Warwick Lee would, the Liberal candidate in Dunkley would be, he would be reserving his position on the champagne.
Well, now we'll take as a group of seats to give heart to those government supporters who may be getting out the razor blades. Liberal seats where the Labor Party is leading. And the first of those is Fadden.
Fadden, which is a Brisbane seat, held for a number of years now by David Joel. On those figures, he's in a lot of trouble, but again, 3.5% of the vote counted, and it would be too early to count that seat out against him at this stage.
Right, Casey in Victoria.
Yes, Mr. Halverson, the Liberal incumbent there, his primary vote is down by 1.5% on those figures. And the ALP candidate, after distribution of preferences, looks in front. Now, that's a more encouraging sign for Labor in Victoria in the sense that 15% of the estimated vote is in.
Right. Deakin, which is the fifth most marginal of the Liberal-held seats.
Yes, and that held by Julian Beale. His vote in primary terms is down by 5%, and on a two-party preferred basis, he is in some trouble, and Madeleine Myatt, the ALP candidate, may well pick that seat up if that pattern continues. But once again, 3% of the vote in, we ought to be very, very careful.
Max?
I'll just slip across to Senator Robert Ray, who almost cheered there for a moment. What news did you get through?
Well, we just looked at the Rankin figures on the screen, and it looked disastrous. I've just talked to the candidate. He says his primary vote is up in every booth.
And so Rankin, which requires 0.7% swing for you to lose,
is looking very good for us at the moment.
Right.
And I think that's promising in terms of the rest of Queensland.
Right. Will you talk on the phone, and Kerry, would you talk with us?
Yes, Richard. Have we got any extra thoughts amongst the panel here on top of what's already been discussed?
Kerry, there seems to be a trend where Labor is doing particularly badly in the seats it doesn't hold. I suspect they're doing much better in the marginals. I mean, interest, of course, is on the marginals, but that overall Labor vote is in fact going down because of the fact that they're not getting as big a vote as they did last time in seats they don't hold.
Yeah,
So
have you got any specific illustrations of that?
no, it's just that seems to be the trend across the board in New South Wales. It's pretty hard sitting here trying to dial up seats.
I'll tell you what we might have on our hands for the first time, Rod. We might have a state election type scenario where sitting members, whom we always discount at federal elections because we say, well, in a federal election, the swings do away with you. But here we have the sitting members doing well, and on both sides.
Except Michael Hodgman.
Except Michael Hodgman. Well, there's got to be, I mean, in every election, seats are going to change hand. He was pretty lucky to hang on last time, I thought, and a couple of ours probably were too. But, you know, in state elections, when they're close, a good sitting member hangs on, and it seems to me our sitting members, by and large, in those marginals are hanging on. And if you have a look at your pendulum, you know, it's very difficult to pick all the seats that are needed for a change of government.
Once again, I'm very puzzled by that pattern that Rod's identified, because the polling that I've seen suggested that it was much closer in the marginal seats, and really it was the reverse situation, where in the seats that were held strongly by Labor or by the Liberal Party, or by the Nationals, you tended to have a more stable position, or a bigger gap between the parties and a narrower gap in the marginals. Now it's emerging to be around the opposite direction. So again, we've got a real conundrum on the polls on this, and some of those figures are very early, but in Victoria, the figures I've been given, which are a bit higher than the ones we've seen on the screen, suggest a swing to the Liberal and National parties of 2.4% to 3.4% of New South Wales, with 5% counted in one state, 10% in the other. Now they would seem to be quite significant, but you've got to, if the position is as it appears in the swing seat, there's got to be something very atypical happening out there.
Well, let's see if our other panel can shed any further light on that, Richard.
Thanks very much indeed, Kerry, and we'll try and get a statistical broad view of what's happening in the country, limited, of course, by the number of votes that have been counted. Max.
It's true. It is a bit of a dog's breakfast at the moment, in as much as you go to marginal seats, you find the other side's doing better. But we should have a look at the national trend, which is probably settling down now and taking into account those early high numbers for the national parties.
It's starting to show a very steady position. With 3.3% of the national vote counted, the ALP vote is down by 0.5%. The Liberals' vote itself is down by 4.4%, the national vote up by 5.3%. And if one combines the Liberal and national vote, we will see a very close result indeed in terms of the collapsing, as you've just seen on the graphics, 47-45. So it's all over the place, and I think the point that Mr. Young made before might well be a very significant one, and that is that incumbents in some areas are holding out better than in other cases.
Of course, this has been the case in the United States, etc. As politicians have learned how to use modern media, incumbency is a very hard thing to overcome. It's now people can actually pick up a better personal following in a way than they used to. We used to just throw it aside and say only the parties matter.
Yes, and as he has said, it's a very strong pattern which is used well in Australia at the state level.
And where it's used, was always been in vogue, of course, has been in Tasmania. So it'd be worthwhile having a look at just how Tasmania is going with its 5 seats, all held by the Liberals.
Yes, and I think we might be looking at all of those 5 seats fairly soon. The position in Tasmania is that the ALP's vote is up by 10.1%, and that's a very good result, and several of those seats could well be carried, which could provide Labor with a bit of an insurance policy if it slips a bit in Sydney and Melbourne. In Hobart itself, the ALP's vote is up by 15.2%. In the country areas of Tasmania, it's up by 3.4%. So Tasmania at this stage is looking a distinct jewel and a great improver for Labor.
Oh, it's quite staggering. Of course, one would expect Labor's lead to fall back during the course of the night, but that really is a bolt out of the starting stalls, isn't it?
Yes, yes it is, and we have to be cautious because of the sample of vote that's counted, but so far Labor would be very encouraged in Tasmania.
It suggests that the impact of the Franklin Dam episode is now fading.
Yes, perhaps that is the case, and of course Mr Bray has been around as Premier for a long time, and perhaps there is some slight reaction to him, but I think we should be careful about confusing state and federal trends.
And Robert Ray, you mentioned to me out of the corner of your ear the Northern Territory.
But first, Max, could I go to Deakin?
Deakin?
We have 24 out of 28 booths in. Labor Party's polling 48% preferred, which is down about 1% on 1984 figures.
So that Deakin is held by the Liberal Party. It needs a 0.8% swing to fall, so you suggest the Labor Party is not going to get it, the Julian Bill's going to hold it.
We're not going to get it, but we've gone fairly close.
Well, I mean, 0.8, you could have gone a bit closer, but the Northern Territory quickly.
Northern Territory, we've got scrutineers have given us 7,000 votes. Labor's running at 45% preferred, but you've got to remember the outer suburbs of Darwin is not the Labor stronghold, and in many ways it shows an improvement over 84 figures. This could be a seat that Labor, in fact, takes off the other side.
And it needs only a 1.5% swing for Labor to pick that up.
That's right, and you won't know the result for another 10 days because a lot of the votes won't come in for a long while.
Senator Richard?
OK, well, let's now systematically go through a run of half a dozen of the key seats, or what we're terming key seats, those plus or minus 4%, where plus or minus 4% would see them change hands. And the first in this series, Barton.
Barton is a New South Wales seat. Of course, it's in Sydney and is based around Western Botany Bay and Hurstville. It's currently held by Gary Punch for the ALP. He looks to be in some trouble with 15% of the vote counted. He is running behind his Liberal opponent, Robert Gemmell. And if that particular trend is sustained during the evening, then Gary Punch might be out of a job, at least parliamentarily.
Mr Punch was the youngest ever mayor in Australian history. He was the mayor of Hurstville, I'm told. The next seat we've been to a couple of times, and we'll continue going back to during the night, Rankin.
The position for David Beddle, the incumbent ALP member, has improved somewhat there. 15% of the vote counted. It's becoming a more reasonable sample, but once again, in a seat that is so geographically diverse as that, I think we should withhold our judgment, and I don't think Gerard Walsh would be completely confident yet, although the National Party, or rather his vote as one of the two National Party candidates, is up very well indeed.
Peter, because we're going to come back to that seat many, many times during the night, let's leave it up again if you would, please. Would you like to explain the import of the two National Party candidates and how we arrive at that two-party preferred vote that says that the vote is 7% down for the ALP?
The way we've done that is we've assumed that there will be a very tight exchange of preferences, almost 100%, between the two National Party candidates. The two-party preferred figure has been derived because, as we see it, the Liberal Party candidate will be deleted, and the Australian Democrats' preferences, half of which initially in a split ticket were directed to the ALP and the other half were directed to the Liberal Party, because the Liberal Party candidate has been deleted, they will then spill over to the ALP. So that's basically trying to explain what is a fairly complex situation.
What confidence, and I don't want you to put sort of any precise figure on it, but what confidence do you, if that was the final figure for the night, or what confidence would you put on the claim, our claim, that the swing there away from the ALP is 7%? What confidence do we have in that notional distribution of preferences?
Well, it's certainly a generalised distribution of preferences, and we've tried to simplify it by grouping seats. At the same time, we've taken cognizance of patterns in 84, so I'd be reasonably confident.
And, of course, in 84, you were, since 84, you've been armed with the information that has come from the 84 election figures being distributed right out to the last preference, even in seats where it wasn't required, because of a change of the law that allowed the electoral office to actually distribute preferences so that persons like yourself would have lots of fresh raw data when it wasn't necessary to decide the seat.
Absolutely, and we've worked those sorts of things through in terms of arriving at those approximations, but they are approximations, and one has to look at local knowledge and see whether in fact the preferences of the Democrats are splitting quite the way that we've generalised, but at this stage it's a reasonable guess.
Okay, one we've looked at a number of times and shall continue to look at during the night. Gilmore, just north of the ACT here, centre, goes from Nowra to Cowra, as John Sharp, the member, has said to me on a number of occasions.
Yes, well, that's a very good result so far. 31% of the vote counted, and John Sharp's vote is 52.9%. John Wright, the ALP candidate, after distribution of preferences, that looks to be a comfortable result for the National Party and a retention of that seat by them. Previously, their two-party preferred margin of safety was 1.3. That looks as though it's going to be strengthened by 4 or 5 points if that particular pattern continues, and it probably will.
Well, we were next going to go to Dawson, but we shan't, because Dr. Prescott has guided me to knock that off the marginal list and leave that, our formal marginal list, and leave that with the Liberal National Party. So next seat for us is Flinders.
Flinders, Peter Reith, the Liberal Party candidate, his vote is up. At this stage, 9% of the vote counted. His vote is up by 6.6%. Tony Lack, the ALP candidate, the ALP vote down by just on 5%. So that looks as though it will be staying where it is. Of course, Flinders is well known also as being the seat formerly held by the late Sir Philip Lynch.
Yes. Max?
If I could, Robert Ray, Deakin, you're still confident, so okay, if we call up on the computer a Deakin, because you were saying the last break, that you've said sufficient booths there to call it confidently that you hadn't won it. But it seems to be on our figures that are coming up on the computer, it's a lot that are going to hang all night.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, what you've got to remember, these figures are coming in from just certain areas. And the figures in Deakin are a lot closer than indicated there. Similarly, the previous seat we looked at, Flinders, is a lot closer than the computers indicated, just by taking the booth-by-booth figures and comparing them with the 1984 vote.
Now, John Howard said that the election be won or lost in Victoria, particularly the marginal seats in Victoria. Now Isaacs is not really a swinging seat, but still a very important litmus test to see.
Yes, we would have needed 4.5% to lose the seat. The early swings in the booth edged up to 3%, but they were mostly in the Liberal areas, and it's now stabilised, and we think it's only a 0.5% swing against the Labor Party.
Senator, thanks a lot. Kerry?
Richard, Rod Cameron has got some information from booths in the electorate of Low which lead him to believe that. Rod?
Low is not looking good for Labor, Kerry. I don't know what the computer says, but my move figures tell me that Low is looking distinctly an unlikely proposition for Labor. If there is a trend that you can discern at this stage, is that New South Wales is all over the place. Tasmania is looking almost uniformly good for Labor, and Queensland is looking quite good for Labor, but it's still far too early.
To come back to Low, the people who've been ringing you from